So we've got a number of Elliotte Friedman updates to dive into based off of what he said yesterday on Oilers Now with Bob Stauffer. Now, we acknowledge that Elliotte Friedman has been working the clock. He posted this article yesterday. We read parts of it in the previous video on this channel talking about Zach Werenski, and there are a number of really interesting predictions that Friedman goes out there and lays out. But instead of talking straight about the free agents and which names could be going to which teams, let's talk more so about the trades. Because, let's be real, trades, they can happen soon. A lot of these guys that we're going to be talking about, maybe they don't necessarily get traded right away. So the necessity to dive into them as quickly as we need to with free agency signings, it's not necessarily there. So let's talk about Elliotte Friedman's Bob Stauffer hit, and give a big shout out over to Canucks News Summaries, who posted and wrote about what Friedman had to say. There are a number of conversations regarding Jason Robertson, Darnell Nurse, and Connor Hellebuck and others, but I wanted to focus on the Vancouver Canucks side of things, as well as talk about everybody's favorite former Vancouver Canuck. Let's talk about Vancouver over here. Friedman says on Edmonton radio, Jake Debrusk, Brock Boeser, and Marcus Pettersson are being discussed. Friedge thinks that the Canucks could and would trade Elias Pettersson, but he would have to waive his no-move clause. The Canucks would rather take back a contract with less term instead of retaining for Pettersson. They've indicated this. So, already, we're talking about some of the same guys. Jake Debrusk, his value is going up by the minute. You take a look at some of the other names around the National Hockey League and the money that they are getting paid. A guy like AJ Greer has just gotten a 4-year, $4.25 million AAV contract. You think teams are looking at him and his, 17 goals this season and saying, yeah, that's a guy that is very well worth that money. And then they're looking at Jake Debrusk and not saying the same thing? Jake Debrusk is making $5.5 million. He is a power play threat. He had scored 20-plus goals on the worst team in the league, and he could probably get maybe 25-plus goals easy if he is on a better team and given power play opportunities. Plus, he is more of a versatile scorer. He is signed till the end of 2032. There is a lot to like out of Jake Debrusk, and I feel like with every new contract that gets signed in free agency, especially for middle to bottom six caliber wingers, Jake Debrusk's value goes up more and more. Let's take a look at another example. Beck Malenstein just got another contract with the Buffalo Sabres. That guy, he's signed on till the end of 2032, making $2.9 million. That's essentially $3 million. He's a bottom six guy. He had 14 points last year. You think teams are looking at Beck Malenstein and saying, oh yeah, well, that guy is worth so much more than $3 million. They're kind of looking at this saying, all right, that's the going rate now. That's the amount of money that it takes to get guys. For a Beck Malenstein plus $2.5 million more, you can get a guy who is a legitimate top six scorer. There's so much to like out of Jake Debrusk these days, and I think a lot of other NHL teams are starting to realize that. Brock Boeser, David Pagnotta said that Brock has higher value than Debrusk. If Debrusk should be evaluated as a first and a prospect, Boeser could be more than that. I don't necessarily know how much I agree with that assessment, to be honest. But still, we have Brock Boeser signed till the end of 2032, making $7.2 million a year. Brock had 48 points last year. He had 50 the year before that, 73 the year before that, and 40 goals too. So Brock obviously is in a much better legacy position than Jake Debrusk is, even though Debrusk's contract is almost $2 million cheaper per season. Brock also is just a really cool dude. A lot of people like him. He has a better reputation than Jake Debrusk does. Who has more career points? That's a pretty interesting question. Jake Debrusk's 356 points, 628 games, and 189 goals. Brock's got way more than that, doesn't he? Yeah, so Brock Boeser, 482 points, 600 games, 226 goals. So yeah, Brock has 130 more points than Jake Debrusk does. Makes sense. No wonder he's worth more, right? But Marcus Pettersson is a really interesting name that has all of a sudden entered the trade sphere. Marcus Petey is signed to the end of 2031, making $5.5 million a year, and this is a contract that I think a lot of Canucks fans thought was a really good one back when it was initially signed upon his acquisition from the Canucks. I mean, you think about it, Marcus Pettersson showed off decently well at the end of the 24-25 campaign after getting traded for the first-round pick that the Canucks acquired in the JT Miller trade from the New York Rangers, and the Canucks signed him quickly. So, shortly after that, you saw Marcus Petey play out the next little while. His 25-26 wasn't great. He had 18 points in 82 games played. I understand that Marcus Pettersson is not a guy whose game you evaluate through point production specifically, but just thinking about the impact that he had at the end of 24-25 versus the impact he had in 25-26, it seemed like Canucks fans were more on board with Marcus Petey from last year, not from this most previously completed year. So he's another one of these veteran guys, big dude, 6'5", 174, lanky. When he's at his best, he's a shutdown D. He can provide some really nice stabilizing play, and he can contribute offensively once in a while. I mean, 30 points is 30 points, no matter who you are. He was able to do that in 23-24. So, Marcus Pettersson, if he is starting to enter the trade market as a valuable middle pair defenseman option for these NHL teams, or maybe even a bottom pair option for a top team, I'd say that's more than appropriate. Vancouver probably stands to get something of value in a Marcus Pettersson trade. Same thing could be said about Debrusk and Brock Boeser. Speaking about that Elias Pettersson, from MP3 Marcus Petey to EP40 Elias Petey, let's talk about Pettersson over here. We all understand the fact that his contract does not match the quality that he provides on the ice. But when it comes to the contract itself, Vancouver still wants to think about their options here, it seems. They would prefer to just take on a bad deal. They don't want to necessarily retain. Although now it does seem like they're more open to retaining than maybe they once upon a time were earlier in the offseason. So I guess we'll see where that goes. It doesn't seem like the Canucks are pushing to get rid of him, but just that if they were given an opportunity to get rid of him, they would probably evaluate it very seriously. That's not really the best place to be if you're Elias Pettersson, unless you know the team you're going to is going to be one of those quieter market teams. Pettersson does have no move protection, so he does have a say in where he goes. Who knows if he pulls off a Zach Werenski? Like, could you imagine if he did one of those? Oh yeah, Pettersson, he's got a really great trade to go over to, I don't know, Toronto or something, and then he says, no, I'm not doing that. Canucks fans would hate this guy more than ever if that were the case. Let's just hope he accepts a trade to wherever it is he gets linked to. And then finally, Friedman speaks out about Quinn Hughes and the Minnesota Wild. He thinks the Wild are going to do something pretty big, or they need the cap room. And he thinks the Wild are going to sign Quinn Hughes, and he thinks it's going to be a 3-year term with $15 to $16 million AAV. That's a little different than what Friedman wrote about on his article on sportsnet.ca, thoughts and predictions on the NHL offseason. He said here, Quinn Hughes, 3 by $18 million sometime in July. That's his whopper pick. I don't think Cale Makar, Bedard, Celebrini, or Carlson sign with their current teams on Wednesday. So, yeah, $18 million a year. Quinn Hughes would be the highest paid player in the NHL if that were to go down. Second highest would be his teammate Kirill Kaprizov. So Billy Guerin and the Wild, they seem to be willing to spend some money. You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about that? The Quinn Hughes contract situation could be coming to an end, at least for the time being, for the next 3 years or so, if Elliotte Friedman's prediction comes true. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. How do you feel about his commentary on Marcus Pettersson, Brock Boeser, and Jake Debrusk, not to mention Elias Pettersson? I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.